Hi, thanks for watching my channel. I'm Courtney, and in today's video, I'm going to show you our entire process for harvesting and preserving our garden corn. This is a 4x8 raised bed of Mirage sweet corn right here, and I believe the days to maturity for Mirage sweet corn is 79 days. And these were ready more at 69 days. So it just goes to show that the visual cues are just as important, if not more important, than counting the days to maturity. And I'll show you these visual cues before I start harvesting. So the first thing we look for is the shape of the ear. You can tell that it's full grown, but also at the top, when it's ready to be harvested, it's round like this. When it's pointed, it's not quite ready. So you can tell that it's round. So the second biggest thing to look for is the silk. So the silk is either going to be, it's going to be dry and brown, or it's just going to be gone like this because it probably dried and then fell right off. So that's the silk. Next, we're going to peel back a little bit and look at the kernels, and they look really good. These are really pretty kernels. So you can tell that they're fully formed here. Next, we're going to pierce into the kernel a little bit. And if a milky substance comes out, it's ready to harvest. If it's clear, it's not ready to be harvested. So you can see that the liquid is milky right there. It's ready to be harvested. We've been eating a lot of this Mirage corn fresh the past week or so. We've been cooking like 8 to 10 ears of it fresh every night and just devouring it. Now it's really, really hot and the plants are struggling, and the corn, we don't want it to be overdone. So we're going to harvest the rest of it and can it. I know that lots of gardeners will harvest and blanch and then freeze their ears of corn, which we've tried, and it's just a personal preference, but we don't really enjoy the texture and flavor that way. So we prefer to harvest it and can it. And I'm going to show you that whole entire process here in a minute after we harvest the corn. I'll show you the quick and efficient way that we use to remove the kernels, and then the whole entire canning process from start to finish. So, all right, I'm going to get harvesting this bed. I've got this bed and 2 more 4x8 raised beds of Mirage corn, and then I have a couple of beds of Who Gets Kissed corn, which I planted a couple of weeks after this corn because I wanted them to tassel at different times to avoid cross-pollination. But I will go through those beds too and see if we have any of those that are ready. That's a really pretty bicolor sweet corn, and the ears are a little bit bigger than the Mirage, but those are our 2 favorite kinds of sweet corn that we grow in our garden. So first I'll harvest the Mirage, and then we'll go see if we have any Who Gets Kissed ears of corn to harvest. This is the Who Gets Kissed corn that I was wondering about. And the silk is dried out, the top is rounded, and the ear seems to be full size. You peel it back, the kernels look good, and the liquid is white. So I'm going to take some of these. Some of them aren't ready yet, some of them are. It's a very pretty bicolored ear of corn versus the Mirage, which is white. But with the Who Gets Kissed and the Mirage, I think it's a beautiful combination of corn here. And we love to can these 2 together. On average, we harvest 90 ears of corn from each 4x8 bed. The Mirage and Who Gets Kissed corn grows usually 2 ears per plant. I planted a lot later this year in June instead of April. The corn grew fine, but maybe we had more worm damage than usual, and the plants were a bit more stressed because of the heat of the late summer. I think I would still prefer to plant as soon as the soil is warm enough in the spring. Here I'm taking this first harvest of mostly Mirage corn, and I'm just removing the husks and the silk from the ears as well as the worm damaged tips. I put them in a big bin of clean water to soak just to try to remove as much debris as possible before I start to remove the kernels. We compost all of the husks. Our chickens love to be around when we're husking the corn because they love eating everything that ends up on the ground, especially if some kernels end up on the ground. Here's our full bin of soaking corn from this harvest. Soaking it like this in clean water helps remove any silk that might be sticking to the ears and any random debris like dirt or little bugs. I just like to do this before I start removing the kernels. Here's a close-up of the worm damage we've been having. We're fortunate that it's only the tips of the corn and the rest of it is fine to eat. It's just part of growing corn organically in the garden. We try to remove as many worms as we can by hand, but it gets challenging with the amount of corn we grow. Now I'll show you the way we remove the kernels. We used to do this with a knife until we came across the kernel cutter. It saves us so much time. It comes with a bit that you attach to your drill and then you just drill it into your ear of corn. Then you attach the kernel cutter tool and use your drill to power it through the circular blade here, which removes the kernels in a matter of seconds. I put a link to the kernel cutter tool in this video's description. Here is the pot of corn we're ready to bring inside to begin the canning process. I'll mention a quick tip about the kernel cutter. If you tighten the blade less when you're running the corn through, it won't cut into the ear of corn as much and you won't have as many of the tough pieces below the kernels. You'll find the right pressure to remove just the kernels. We follow the recipe in the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving using the hot pack method. You add a cup of water for every 4 cups of corn you have, then bring your pot of corn to a boil and simmer for 5 minutes. In the meantime, we have our hot sterilized jars and canning tools ready and we're preparing our pressure canner. We use a weighted gauge pressure canner. For this harvest, we're using pint jars. Our canner holds 19 pint jars, so if we're canning more than that all at once, we have to run separate loads. With this harvest, we ended up with 11 pint jars. So we fill each jar with our corn, and I fill it slightly under the 1-inch headspace mark. I like to do this because I top it with boiling water up to the 1-inch mark just to make sure there's enough liquid in there. This is a personal preference, but I like to have liquid covering the corn in the jar. So next, I'll use the headspace measurement tool to check the headspace. It's okay if it's slightly under 1 inch, but we risk the lids not sealing properly if it's above the recommended headspace. I also gently stir the corn to help release air bubbles, which can also affect sealing. I thoroughly wipe the jar rims with a damp cloth because if there's any spilled corn, that could also affect the lid sealing. Next, I carefully take the lids from a pot of simmering water using this magnet tool and set them on the jars. I add the bands, tightening them to just fingertip tight, not too tight but not too loose either. I load all of the jars into the pressure canner, which is ready with boiling water in the bottom. You'll want to make sure that there's enough boiling water in the bottom of the canner when you're processing something like corn that processes for a long time. Corn is 55 minutes versus tomato sauce, which is only 15 minutes, so we put more water in the canner. Sometimes the water will boil off while you're filling your jar, so you might need to top it off again. The canner will be damaged if it runs dry. Next, I add the lid, balance it, tighten it down, and turn up the heat. When a good head of steam has formed, it's time to add the weight. We use 15 psi based on our elevation, so you'll want to adjust this to your specific elevation. The weight doesn't measure pressure, it just releases excess pressure above a certain amount. So now we gradually decrease the heat until the weight stops jiggling constantly, but jiggles at least 1 time per minute. We look for 2 to 3 times per minute. When it reaches that point, that's when we set our timer for 55 minutes. After the 55 minutes of processing, we turn the heat off and let the canner cool down. We wait until the gauge reads 0 before we remove the weight and open the lid. Even when the gauge reaches 0, obviously we still need to be really careful opening the canner because it's still really hot. The contents of the jars are still boiling, so we remove them carefully and set them on a heat-resistant surface. I put them in a place out of the way because I like to leave them be for 24 hours before I put them away. It seems like a lot of work now, but it's so nice having these jars of corn throughout the winter. I really like having the jars because they're versatile. You can just open them right up and either eat them the way they are or use them in recipes for chilies and soups or whatever you're feeling like cooking that night. After your first couple of times harvesting and canning corn, you'll find your routine and the whole process becomes way more efficient. Thank you for watching. Wherever you are in your gardening journey, I hope you enjoyed this video and hope you'll join me for more content from our garden. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons.